Thank you very much. It's a big honor to be here. I'm going to give you a perspective from Texas. As many of you know, Texas has a long history with energy, and I'll talk a little bit about water as well. The nexus of energy and water is my research specialty, so I can't resist talking about it a little bit. Next slide, please. In my perspective, the energy problem is a convergence of three problems happening at once. Next slide, please, Shannon. We have three energy crises happening at once. We've got an environmental crisis of climate change. We have concerns about resource depletion or having enough of the resource we need to accomplish the things we want. We also have concerns about national security or violent extremism funded by the energy trade. And unfortunately, these things happen together and amplify each other. Next slide, please. As we look for a solution to balance our three priorities, we need to come up with enough energy that gives us the abundance we want for our economic priorities without undermining our environmental objectives and without undermining our national security objectives. And the trick here for energy is that, unfortunately, most solutions only satisfy two or one out of these three. For example, in the U.S., we're concerned about having enough energy and having energy in a secure form. Well, the answer to that is coal, except that it has challenges with the environmental perspectives that we haven't learned how to deal with fully yet. And then we have some other options there, maybe wind, but maybe we don't have enough wind to solve all our problems, but it is secure and it is domestic. So this is the energy problem, and what we're having as a problem here in the U.S. is the same everywhere else. Next slide, please. I see an energy transition coming, as do all of us, I guess, and I see it's comprised of two basic changes. One is a change in demand for energy, primarily because of population growth. As we get more people, they have demand for energy. And secondly, economic growth, which pushes up their per capita demand for energy. So we have a new type of demand coming on in the next few decades, and then a change in our source of energy for a variety of reasons. We want domestic sources, we want low carbon sources, and we want renewable and sustainable sources. So we have a change coming, partly to address these crises I just talked about. Next slide, please. If we look at the way the world and the United States consume energy, we find that actually we're quite similar. The left shows a pie chart for USA 2008 energy consumption. We consumed about 100 quads, or 100 quadrillion BTU of energy. A BTU is a British thermal unit. 1 BTU is the energy contained in one kitchen match. So in the United States, in a year, we consume 100 million kitchen matches of energy. And for those of you using different units, that's a quadrillion BTU is about the same as an exajoule of energy. So we use about 100 exajoules of energy in the United States. And the mix is split up between petroleum, coal, natural gas, nuclear renewables is about the same kind of pie chart or distribution of resources as the world. It's almost identical. The world and the U.S. both use about 85% of their energy from fossil fuels. This is a challenge. The difference being the world uses about 500 quadrillion BTU, or 500 quads of energy, about 500 exajoules. It's the same kind of challenge, and this means that the U.S. and the world have aligned interests. If we can solve our problems in the U.S., we can help the world solve its problems, and vice versa. Next slide, please. The view from Texas is one of historical abundance. In Texas, we consume a lot of energy, and we produce a lot of energy, both in total and per capita, and in the process, we have made a lot of money. We've become very rich as a state and individually, if you compare us to other states or other parts of the world, and we also consume a lot of water in total and per capita. This photo at the bottom is a picture of the Gusher Spindletop, which blew January 10th, 1901. That one gusher changed the balance of world oil production away from the Baku region in Russia towards Texas. Texas has been a dominant oil producer in some respects for about 100 years or so. Next slide. If you look at it just compared to the U.S., we're still very active in energy production, and this is both a good news and a bad news story. So I'm telling you this to give you a sense of our history in Texas and what it means for as we move forward. We still produce about 1 million barrels a day. There's about 1/5 of the nation's production of oil. We produce about 1/4 of the nation's natural gas. We produce more than 1/3 of the nation's wind, and we're also the greatest producer of electricity. We're also the greatest consumer of oil, gas, and electricity and wind, and we're the number 6 producer for coal in the nation, but the number 1 consumer of coal. People don't think of Texas as a coal state. They think of West Virginia, Kentucky, Appalachia, maybe Wyoming. Texas is the number 1 consumer of coal because we use so much electricity. We also have refineries that have about 1/4 of total U.S. capacity. We can refine about 5 million barrels per day of oil. Energy is big in Texas. Next slide. We also have the Texas Railroad Commission. I'm sorry, I can't see the very top of the slide, which was the world's first oil cartel. So along with making a lot of money off energy comes manipulation of oil prices. This is something we were very good at. From the 1940s and 1960s, we were OPEC before there was OPEC, and in some respects, we were better at it. Whether that's something to brag about or not, I don't know, but it was something we did. Where we had the Railroad Commission, which was set up by Governor Hogg in the 1890s to manage interstate commerce. Once oil was traded across state boundaries, the Railroad Commission managed and regulates the energy industry in Texas. Ironically, it does not regulate railroads today for some reason. So the Railroad Commission wins the awards for the worst named agency in the state of Texas. Anyway, the Railroad Commission set quotas and set Texas oil price in collaboration with Oklahoma and Louisiana. So the Texas local agency, the Railroad Commission, effectively set world oil price for about 20 to 30 years. And this isn't necessarily a good news story, but it shows sort of the role Texas historically had in the role of energy production worldwide. A lot of that regulation was making sure independents did not produce above quotas, same kind of challenges OPEC has today. We had all those challenges in the 40s to 60s. Next slide, please. So the good news is we made a lot of money off this in Texas. The bad news is we have environmental impacts from this. Texas is by far the nation's leading emitter of CO2 emissions. We emit about 11.5% of US carbon emissions, about 2.5% of global carbon emissions. And I've listed here for you a chart of CO2 emissions in million metric tons per year, showing China. These are data from 2006, data from Texas were 2005. China is number one in a tie essentially with the United States, followed by Russia, India, Japan, Germany, then Texas. If Texas were a nation to be seventh on the list behind Germany, Germany has 3 times the population of Texas. So we have large environmental impacts from our work. We have air quality issues. We have water quality issues. We have all sorts of environmental impacts we need to deal with. The one that people are worried about the most now is our carbon. We think about carbon differently, though, because we think about energy as a moneymaker. The more energy we consume, the richer we get. The more carbon we emit, the richer we get. This is the mindset in Texas that actually in many respects reflects the American attitude. Next slide. So as a state, we actually make a lot of money from this, and so this has been good for the state. We make billions of dollars from natural gas production, oil production. The state owns lands that we collect lease money from, and this is about $5 billion a year out of a budget of about $85 billion. So this has been very healthy for the state government, plus all the private industry, which is a multi-hundred billion dollar industry in the state of Texas, has been good for us. It's been good for the economy. And one thing that I think is funny is here is we tax oil and gas production. We had severance taxes and ad valorem taxes. And Texas is a very Republican tax-hating state. And then you compare us to California, which is a very democratic, tax-friendly state. California does not tax oil and gas production, but Texas does. We understood early on that these mineral rights are value and that the state government needs to obtain some of that value when production happens. Next slide, please.